Long-term geologic carbon storage facilitates emission reduction by permanently storing carbon underground. The challenge lies in developing effective policy frameworks and navigating complex permitting processes to facilitate the deployment of storage projects. Ensuring the success of these projects requires advancements in monitoring, reporting, and verification mechanisms to guarantee permanence and effectiveness of stored carbon. Here to moderate this final session on frameworks for long-term storage is Jeff Kummer, Chief Executive Officer at Meriden Carbon.
Thank you, Abby. This is a good panel, so if there are people in the hallway, I think you want to come back in and sit down and listen to this. We have a group of women here that are really the tip of the spear. They're actually putting what we're talking about, what we've been talking about the last 2 days, into action and are regulating those things that are being put into action. So I think there's a lot to learn here. Carbon storage, geologic carbon storage is so interesting because as Kevin Connors said, I like it, geology is king. If we can remove as much CO2 as we want, but ultimately you have to put that CO2 somewhere, and you have to put it deep underground, among other things that you can do with it. So super excited to moderate this panel. My name is Jeff Kummer. I'm the CEO and founder of Meriden Carbon. My team of experts, all with roots at the Colorado School of Mines, are developing an asset in the northern DJ Basin in southeast Wyoming that we're calling the Steamboat Carbon Storage Hub. It's really interesting. Our approach here has been to partner directly with landowners. So our boardroom has a lot more cowboy hats and dirt on the floor, I like to say, as those landowners are sitting at the table with us, talking about the way that we're going to develop their lands for long-term CO2 sequestration. And we're on the cusp, I think, of going through the permitting process of one of the largest carbon storage hubs in our country with over 100,000 acres contiguous under lease. We're also going through a phase 2 carbon safe permit application with Colorado School of Mines, University of Wyoming, the EERC, and ARI. So we're super excited to be a part of the conversation here as well. But enough about me. I want to introduce you to these panelists. And since they probably won't talk about their accolades, I want to talk about their accolades very briefly and then allow them to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with, all the way at the end, I think, I'm going to start with Ashleigh Ross. Ashleigh has a bachelor's and master's in chemical engineering from Oklahoma State University, a master's in technology and policy from MIT, and a master's in philosophy from Cambridge. She has led major advancements in CCS at major oil companies prior to joining Carbon America. And Carbon America, you may have seen in the headlines, recently submitted their first Class 6 permit application right here in Colorado. Ashleigh.
To flesh that out a little bit more, so my name is Ashleigh Ross. I'm Carbon America's Vice President and Head of Commercial Development and Policy. I've been dedicated to the carbon management space for 22 years. Fell into this rabbit hole pretty early, actually, because of the Dakota gasification facility that Kevin Connors talked about up in Beulah, North Dakota. So over the course of my career in CCS, I worked with Howard Herzog at MIT in capture technology and techno-economic informed deployment strategies in that first wave of CCS in the 2000s when cap and trade legislation was supposed to be happening. Essentially, then I was recruited to ConocoPhillips to develop large CCS projects in that first wave of CCS, worked on the original Class 6 rules and Subpart RR rules, as well as the original community engagement best practices that were done by an environmental think tank. After the demise of cap and trade legislation and the entire CCS world really just collapsed, I went hardcore subsurface. The subsurface was the one technical component I didn't have as much depth in. I ended up becoming the ConocoPhillips global subject matter expert in exploration and appraisal, reservoir engineering, always with the intent to apply it back to CCS, which I then did when I joined BP's team in 2017 and spent about 4 years building out their CCS portfolio and strategy globally and in the Western Hemisphere. And then I joined the Carbon America team about 3 years ago. Our mission is to safely store and sequester as much CO2 as possible, as quickly as possible, which is my own personal mission in life. And at Carbon America, we do that through two major ways. One is developing a capture technology. We've got a cryogenic capture technology that takes care of all of those other co-pollutants and does it without chemicals or solvents or water. But beyond that, we do full value chain project development. So we have advanced Colorado's first commercial CCS projects with the Sterling and Yuma ethanol projects going to our Denova site. I've got our rock samples right here from our well. And we've also advanced Nebraska's first commercial CCS project. We've also brought a carbon sequestration grant with almost $33 million in funding for sequestration in southern Colorado, as well as a direct air feasibility study. And so we're kind of planting these big flags to build out carbon management ecosystems across the United States.
Thank you, Ashleigh. Next, I'm going to go to Alicia Summers to my left here. She is the Chief Development Officer of Frontier Carbon Solutions. With a bachelor's degree from the University of Texas at Arlington, she leads all aspects of engineering and related due diligence for Frontier. Frontier is leading the way in Wyoming. They have recently, last year, got their first 3 Class 6 permits. So that's super exciting. Alicia, please introduce yourself.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jeff. I wasn't expecting that, so thank you. So Alicia Summers, Chief Development Officer. I'm one of the founding partners of Frontier Carbon Solutions. We founded Frontier in 2021. I know that sounds relatively new, but when you think about carbon management, that's a lifetime. It feels like I've aged 100 years since we started this project. Had a lot of fun doing it too, still rocking and rolling at it. Our company is staffed with energy professionals across the oil and gas spectrum, midstream, transportation, upstream, and then operational, and then and in finance as well. And so really, kind of like Kevin mentioned earlier, carbon storage is just a natural derivative of oil and gas. We've been doing this for eons, so we're taking those tools and experiences that we learned in our prior lifetime and applying it to carbon management. We're backed by Tailwater Capital. It's a transitional energy private equity firm located in Dallas, Texas. We're lucky to have them help us with our project. At Frontier, we're a full turnkey solution, meaning we will provide emitters, capture technology, tools if they don't have them. We'll also provide financial tools to help them finance these capital-intensive capture projects. And then really our niche is the transportation and the storage side. And we're developing our project to be the first large-scale open-source hub in Wyoming, and it's called the Sweetwater Hub. It's not a unique name, believe me. Like I said, we're energy professionals, oil and gas professionals, engineering. We're not creative. We're located at the corners of Uinta, Lincoln, and Sweetwater County, so we call it the Sweetwater Hub. That's our first unit. It's about 11,000 acres of pore space, and Jeff stole my thunder. I wanted to brag about my first 3 Class 6 permits that we got in Wyoming. That was in December after a 14-month process. So excited. That was the best Christmas present I could have received, I think. We're looking to drill those wells by the end of the year and then be set up to take CO2 volumes a year following. Now, we're not just stopping there. We're actually expanding and further characterizing an additional acreage piece. Right now, we're looking towards about 100, kind of like Jeff, about 100,000 contiguous pore space acres. We have about 50,000 under lease in Wyoming. It's unique in that we're checkerboarded. And so every other section is a BLM section. So for the remaining acreage that we don't have under lease, we actually started that process with the BLM to get pore space right away. So that's been a year in the making. We hope we get that pore space right away here soon. And I should say we're building our project to be an open source hub. And so we do have an anchor emitter. We're focused on Trona. And I don't know if most of you know what Trona is, but I call it the best kept secret in Wyoming. It's a wonderful resource. I can nerd out on it. Happy to talk about it later at some point. But really, it's an important resource, not only to the state of Wyoming, but it's a huge export for Wyoming and the U.S. And it's really hard to replace the intensive processes that they have with from coal or nat gas to renewables. So we're here to solve that problem and help decarbonize it so it can still remain a not go by the wayside like coal. We want to keep it going. And then also we have a great partner. They spoke yesterday, Carbon Capture Inc. They're our DAC partner. They will be storing their CO2 volumes in our hub as well. And so mentioned our Class 6 permits. We're drilling those wells this year. Thankfully, we have the support of our sponsor, Water, but we also were awarded last year a Carbon Safe Phase 3 grant to fully characterize this hub. We're doing that with the help of the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources. They've been huge. They've done a ton of research out here. We couldn't have gotten going without the University of Wyoming, so happy to have them. And then also we have great support from the state of Wyoming. We received a grant from the Wyoming Energy Authority. This is a mouthful. The Governor Energy Matching Fund to help support us and our cost share for our Carbon Safe award. Super excited. And then I think that's it, and I'll kick it off back to Jeff. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Alicia. And your favorite regulator and mine, Lily Barkau. She has her bachelor's in geology from Wichita State University and master's in environmental science and engineering from the Colorado School of Mines. The Wyoming DEQ, in my experience, has been really an exceptional regulatory group of just friendly, very smart individuals that help navigate through this process of Class 6 permitting. Lily is also representing the state of Wyoming and maybe perhaps all of us in her appointment to the White House Task Force on CCUS as appointed by President Biden. So that's awesome. Lily.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Can you hear me? Okay. So as mentioned, I'm Lily Barkau. I'm the Groundwater Section Manager for the Water Quality Division at the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality. I've been with DEQ now for about 18 years, 10 of those in my current position as a Groundwater Section Manager. My background is pretty heavily involved in RCRA, so it brings over to the Class 6 program pretty well. I certainly never thought of coming to groundwater to work. I think as most geologists that are in the room, our plans were to, become volcanologists or, mining. So I'm cut off. So you guys don't care. Work in mining. So, when I started, my father, who is a surface water expert, before he retired, he was, groundwater is where it's at, and that's the future of the U.S. So somehow I ended up here. So curse you, Dad, for saying this was what I needed to do, and here I am. To address someone's comment earlier that there's just not a lot of excitement for CCUS. You have not been in a room with these two ladies. Ashleigh will exhaust you after 5 minutes. The passion that they bring to CCS is just phenomenal. And, working in Wyoming, I was part of the group, one of the only remaining people that worked on the Class 6 primacy and setting up the program. And we've been working very hard, having operators like Alicia and Frontier Carbon Solutions to come in. They worked with us. They met with us early and often. They followed our guidance documents, and the completeness review for their completeness and technical adequacy review for their permit applications were exactly 9.6 months. So we were very proud of that. It took us a little bit of time to catch up to them and draft permits and how to move forward, and we're learning every day to streamline the process. So we're very excited that the next sets of permits, hopefully we can get those out even quicker. But having operators, like these two companies here, it really helps our job. When there's that collaboration that comes forward. So. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. So we're going to attempt to cover a lot of ground here, and so we've agreed to kind of direct the questions one by one at one or two of the panelists, and then just kind of keep moving through the panel. So I want to start with a question for Ashleigh with Carbon America. I want to start pretty broad. Sometimes we go too far into the weeds right off the bat. So I want to start pretty broad and kind of bring us all back to middle school science in remembering that CO2, our world deals with CO2 naturally through the forests, like we heard in the last panel, through things like our grazing land. I saw someone from the USDA is here, NRCS. But we're talking about deep geologic underground storage. Can you help us understand, Ashleigh, why we're talking about that, and maybe specifically why it's important through the lens of MVR, the measurement, verification, recording of the CO2 that's going away into permanent storage?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And I'll also specify that I actually got into this space as a skeptic, because as a little Girl Scout tree hugger, the idea of shoving a bunch of CO2 under my feet made me a little bit nervous. So I actually got into this to kind of convince myself about whether or not this subsurface sequestration process was real. If you could throw my slides up, please. So, we've already kind of touched on, and Kevin did a great job on the last panel talking about kind of what we look for in terms of good sequestration sites: containment, capacity, stability, the right depth, the right chemistry, to make sure that we're protecting our underground sources of drinking water, et cetera. But if we take a look at the right side of it, taking a look at those trapping mechanisms and how that CO2 is actually stored in the subsurface, right? It's initially stored structurally. CO2 is buoyant, it's naturally going to want to rise up. That's why we look for rocks like this. This is the flower pot shale. This is the seal, the top seal or the secondary confining seal for our well in northeast Colorado. And so as that CO2 then goes up against that seal, that seal is going to kind of keep it from going up further from those buoyant forces. But then it starts getting stuck, right? It's moving within between the grains of sand like this, right? This is actually the Lakota. This is actually too fresh for us to inject CO2 into. Actually, it just came in just below 10,000 parts per million, so we can't actually inject CO2 into it, even though there's oil field waste going into this formation elsewhere in the state. So we're working those aquifer exemption processes. But when we've got big sandstone like this, that CO2 is moving through those tiny little pores, and it kind of gets stuck within those pores. And so that's represented by that residual trapping. That CO2 then starts dissolving into the water, and that then really is kind of there mixed in with the water, so it's not really its own free phase anymore. And over geologic time, that CO2 turns to rock. And so as we think about, the time since the injection stops, those trapping mechanisms go from kind of structural to residual to solubility to mineral, so it's getting more and more and more permanent over time. Compare that to the nature-based solutions, right, where we're primarily, storing CO2 in biomass or in oceans or in soil. And there are some forms of nature-based solutions that are more permanent than others, and some of the biochar and bio-oil approaches are really pretty interesting. But a lot of those other nature-based solutions, are really looking at CO2 fluxes and how much CO2 is absorbed into the tree and how much would have happened under normal conditions and how much is happening under these conditions, and how is that going to change over time, and acknowledging that in most of those natural processes, that's a natural cycle. So that CO2, that is absorbed by that tree, what happens when that tree dies? That CO2 is going to go back into the atmosphere if we don't do anything about it. And so the nature-based solutions tend to have a lot of challenges around those measurement methods, aerial imagery and how much can we track the vegetation growing and trying to understand all of those fluxes and calibrate all of that. In geologic sequestration, we're tracking molecules of CO2 from stacks of factories or from direct air capture facilities, and we're actually measuring molecules of CO2 going through pipelines, through meters. And so we've got lots of sensors and physical equipment be able to do this monitoring, measurement, and verification. And if we think about all of the different things that we have to monitor in CCS in order to make sure that all of that CO2 is where we're predicting it is going, that it's not creating any complications with underground sources of drinking water. We've got lots and lots of tools and technologies to be able to monitor all of these things. And what the beautiful thing about that geologic sequestration is we're tracking molecules of CO2 that we can pretty easily track and measure, which is pretty different than the nature-based solutions. And so why is that important? That's important for public confidence. As I said, I got into this as a skeptic. Is this going to, cause ruptures and CO2 leaking out of the ground, right? We need to be able to apply these technologies to demonstrate to the public, yes, the CO2 is in the ground. It's where we predict it's going to be. It's not causing any problems. So that generating kind of public confidence is a really key part of it. And then, of course, the other key part is we have to do all of this monitoring, reporting, and verification in order to be able to claim the 45Q tax credit. And so there are well-designed kind of methodologies and accounting protocols to take all of the data we get from all of these different systems, put them into all of our material balance calculations to be able to demonstrate that verification and storage.
Thank you, Ashleigh. So it seems that underground geologic storage is a good solution for all of this CO2 that we have to put away. I want to talk a little bit with Alicia about site selection. So I'm just going to have a few questions for you to hit on here. One, just very basically, can you just drill a well anywhere in the western United States and pump CO2 into the ground? Help us understand why or why not. And what are the regulatory factors driving those best places for geologic storage? Sorry, not just regulatory, but geologic, regulatory, and anything else that Frontier considers when going through site selection.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I'm going to say the Greater Green River Basin in Wyoming is the best place to be. That's where I'm at, but I don't want many neighbors coming in my territory. But do love Wyoming. Now, I'm kind of going to leverage what Kevin said earlier, and then also what Ashleigh said. You can drill a well anywhere and try to put CO2 down hole, but it may not take, and you may not be able to put as much. So really, when you look at these opportunities, and we could talk about this all day long. We don't have all day, so I'll try to do the crib notes for you. But to leverage what Kevin was saying, generally, the same characteristics that go into a good conventional oil and gas field are the same ones that you want for storage, with a few nuances. And he hit on this before. You want depth. We transport and inject CO2 to optimize and be more efficient about how much we can store down hole and transport in supercritical phase. And so you want to be deeper than 2,500 feet, because that, with the hydrostatic pressure of the reservoir, you keep that in that dense phase. And so that's one way it's not going to get back into the atmosphere. But you need to have more than just that. You need to have porosity, which Ashleigh was great at describing that when showing her rocks, and permeability, meaning you want the CO2 to be able to flow through the reservoir and then have space within the rock to stay put for a long time. And then you want to make sure that you have a good containment and confinement, and that goes back to those sealing layers. You want to make sure you have good shale, good tight rock, and that CO2 is not going to go anywhere. And then also, you don't want transmissive faults or existing well bores to provide, migratory path for that CO2 to go into other formations. And then more importantly, this is to protect the USDW and the surrounding community. So you want to make sure you're targeting saline sandstone reservoirs greater than 10,000 parts per million. Now, that may be easy. We have a lot of great oil and gas, across the U.S., definitely in the West, but it's not that easy, like Jeff kind of intimated. You have to have a supportive legislative framework. And so thankfully, with some states and more coming on board too, but Wyoming, we've been able to check that box. They were, alongside North Dakota, they were the first to establish statutes for pore space, and then definitely received primacy for Class 6. And that was huge. I think our project, I said we've been around for 3 years. I don't think I could be here today and say I have 3 Class 6 permits if I were in a EPA jurisdiction state. And, that's not their fault. I think things are coming. There's just there's a lot of homework to do there. So really Wyoming and North Dakota were on the forefront there. And then also energy IQ. I think a lot of people miss this. There are a lot of states that lack this energy IQ. And thankfully I have that in Wyoming. And that's been huge as we go out and talk to landowners. They understand oil and gas. And like I said, carbon capture sequestration is just a derivative of that. And so energy IQ is just huge and has made my job a whole lot easier in the state of Wyoming. And then proximity to CO2. I don't think not all projects are one size fits all. You kind of have to leverage what is your cost to capture versus what is going to be your cost to transport, and figure out, where you can be happy. So for us, we're pretty proximal to a lot of great emissions, like within 25 miles or less. Our Trona emitters are less than 12 miles away from us. So we don't have a lot of disruption with pipeline that we're going to have to build, and that's a huge selling point to some of our landowners. And then I mentioned cost of transportation and cost of capture. That's huge. And so as you sprinkle in those other ideas into finding an ideal place to put your projects, you really narrow down your opportunities on where these can be. So wish I had a key, an easy button. It's not so easy, but those are some of the ideas that we look at when we're trying to find an ideal place to store CO2.
Thank you, Alicia. And Lily, with Class 6 primacy in Wyoming, can you give the audience a sense for what, like, kind of just general framework for the work that you're doing at the DEQ, and then maybe bring us in a little bit to how you've seen activity rise in your office, what challenges you're facing, maybe what challenges you're hearing from operators that they're facing, and then maybe a general outlook for, the light at the end of the tunnel.
Sure. So it is definitely a very exciting time in Wyoming. Legislature and regulations they started around 2008. So we've been looking at this for quite some time, where getting those regulations in place to look at risk and even financial assurance. And there was a work group that was developed that looked at those particular items. And then it also included permitting requirements. And we had all of that in place even before the federal regulations came about. So it was a very natural process once we got primacy. And, always my little poking fun with North Dakota of us getting primacy quicker than you guys, but we joke in fun. So, we applied for primacy in 2018. And we've actually had a lot of activity since then, since that announcement. And so a lot of operators coming in to talk about what the future looked like. And, once we got primacy in 2020, then it was, how do we move forward and get these off the ground? So we're pretty fortunate in Wyoming as well that we've had primacy of the other class of UIC wells since 1983. And I have a phenomenal team there that are well-versed in the Class 1 disposal wells. So they're able to take that knowledge and experience and transfer that quite easily to Class 6. Because as one of my staff members calls it, Class 6 is just Class 1 on steroids. So I'm really able to depend on them to work through the permitting process, and then I'm able to do these kind of things and figure out the roadmap of how to work through these. So from operators, the biggest item is streamlining, and getting these permits to move forward. It's really important for states to have primacy to streamline those permitting processes, mainly because, as we say in Wyoming, Wyoming knows Wyoming. Our geologists know the formations, they know the seals, they know the faults and fractures and everything that goes into that site characterization. They ask about how to permit projects versus the individual wells, because the Class 6 program doesn't allow for area permits like the Class 1 does. So each well has to be its own permit, which it's a lot of redundant information if you've got 6 or 12 or 40 wells that are coming in for a project. And then how do you help the regulators to review a lot of redundant information? People are excited about Wyoming and their primacy, especially after issuing the 3 permits. It's been a mad rush. Just all of a sudden, people wanting to come in and different ideas. And I think one of the questions yesterday was about CO2, and the difference between 6 and 1. so a lot of people are interested in sequestering and seeing how they can help with the different initiatives. And it's, well, I have this waste. What if I sprinkle in some CO2? And we call it sequestration. And it's, no, that's not quite what that is, but we appreciate it. And, for Class 6, you're looking at 90% or more. I think Frontiers are, 98% pure CO2 for the injection. So it's pretty minimal on, the other additives that are there. We're seeing, the opposite questions, as Kevin had mentioned earlier, not that it's prolonging industry, but the concern is in Wyoming, we're trying to shut down industry, and that's the hesitation for CCS. And it really is a compliment. I love driving my car. I love going shopping. So, if it can't be grown, it's mined, it's oil. So we can't do any of those things without industry. So we really need these complementary services. Just misinformation that's out there, that's there, and different ideas that come up. And so, we get operators that, propose things. Well, what if you did it this way? Or if I'm at a conference, I'll be sitting there and then hearing everyone talk about, well, the regulators want this, or the regulators want that. And it's, well, how about ask the token regulator in the room? Because I'm more than happy to share. So everyone's just so excited about, this field and coming into Wyoming and working on it. So just the enthusiasm that we're seeing, like the staffing, I have one and a half dedicated staff to this, and then I work on this in my spare time. And then run the rest of the groundwater program in the meantime, and then so they're well versed, all that experience from Class 1, and trying to write different guidance documents, trying to help streamline the process, adapting as we have the different changes, aquifer exemptions, pore space, interstate pore space, working with our neighboring states, and what that all looks like. It's booming. I mean, thankfully, Frontier Carbon Solutions came in, with their 3 to start, but this year we could be up to 30 applications by the end of this year, and then that's just for the ones that we know of. This industry, it's well known, the science is known, we can do this, but I think operators are still holding it kind of close to their vest, that it's what they're going to go with. So sometimes it's a surprise when someone shows up and they're going to have 12 applications submitted in the next week, and that sends me into a panic and drinking lots of wine at the end of the day. So my feedback to operators: talk to your regulators often, early and often. And just understand it's collaboration, and we're here to work with you.
Thank you. In the last 10 minutes or so here, before we go to questions, I want to ask the panelists to try to dialogue and have some discussion around, first, the topic for the operators, first, the topic of stakeholder and community engagement. So what does that look like on the front lines as you've been out there doing town halls and talking to the public? From the public perception, like the broader stakeholders, and then also specifically the landowners. I want to start with Ashleigh on broader public perception, and then maybe Alicia, get your take on landowners, and then just parlay that into the education piece. So the framework at the DEQ, what are the tools that we have in place to ensure, and that assurance of where the CO2 is going and the extent of that plume, and kind of understanding that as well. So open the next 10 minutes or so to that conversation, starting with you, Ashleigh.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And not to kind of double click on the last panel too much, but public perception is everything. I mean, frankly, I've been in this industry long enough, and I've been watching it long enough, and I rode that first wave of CCS, and there are some of us that rode that first wave and learned some really important, valuable lessons that some of the newer entrants in CCS haven't really learned. And as we think about, we have been at inflection points in the CCS industry before, right? CCS started taking off in the 2000s. It got shaky when the economy got shaky. It started going back down, right? We've had a massive ramp up in the last few years, right? But then we've seen, the permit challenges and some of the opposition materialize. There are a lot of people that say, okay, this is it, we're good. Industry is going to happen. We are still at an inflection point. And the key determinant of how much CCS we get to do in America hinges entirely on community and social acceptance. And unfortunately, it's never been more exciting in CCS, right? But at the same time, it's never been more exciting in CCS. And when we got the tax credit from $35 to $50 in 2018, that was enough to bring just enough potential projects economic to get people starting to move in CCS. And unfortunately, we're all very glad that we got, $85 in the Inflation Reduction Act. And so, a lot of people thought, oh, that makes CCS that much more economic. There are that many more projects that are economic. All that did is help account for some of the inflation that has happened from COVID, and that has helped everybody along the value chain expect a bigger piece of it. So we've got the fact that the tax credit was raised enough to get everybody really excited, but it's not that the economics of the projects all changed as well, right? So it's not that it created more margin. All it really did is just change the goalpost of where things are at. And as we think also about how some of the dynamics have played out of CCS over the last few years, we used to assume $1 a ton stakeholder injection fees. We are seeing those go up and up and up and up. And this is not a market-based commodity. We have no ability to absorb those increasing stakeholder costs, right? And we've got, when everybody got so excited when we got $85, and a lot of people, especially people from the oil and gas industry, kind of rushing around like this is the oil boom. We have people rushing around like this is the oil boom, thinking that it works like the oil and gas industry. This is a tax credit, not a market-based commodity. And so you've got a lot of people, also some people going around doing land deals and kind of doing projects at a loss to capture the market. So you've got people doing projects at a loss to capture the market, people proposing these really big projects, big pipeline networks. So it's led to these impressions of CCS having the kind of profitability as oil and gas, right? There has materialized a false impression of the profitability of CCS. This is not a market-based commodity. This is pollution control paid for by a federal tax credit. Let's take a deep breath and be more realistic about kind of what we're doing and how we're doing it. And I think, from a fundamental perspective, I think we've been trying to do it using comfortable frameworks that we've been used in past industries. How far is that getting us, right? Have things been getting easier in CCS, or are things getting harder in CCS when it comes to stakeholders? And there's some people that say it's entirely on industry to figure out what those benefits need to be. But from a public perception, stakeholder perception perspective, I think we absolutely need to be thinking about the stakeholders from a policy perspective as well. And that is the really key part of that public perception that we need to all be taking a deep breath and thinking about.
I think I'd like to add, for the stakeholder situation, building your team to go out and speak with the communities. As I mentioned, Wyoming knows Wyoming, so we go out there and it's what kind of communication are they going to want, and they want that face-to-face interaction, and they want that honest interaction. And Alicia went out there and she sat on many couches. Talking to people, and I think there was even an offer to marry her daughter to a grandson. So I mean, and milkshakes. They offered to take us for milkshakes. So and that's just the kind of people that are there. But when it comes down to it, they're not going to trust industry. They realize industry is there for the bottom line. They're not going to trust government because they're afraid we're trying to take over. So when we did our public meetings, we teamed with the School of Energy Resources with the University of Wyoming. And the feedback was, thank you for bringing them. You know, they were able to ask those scientific questions because it means more to the community hearing from academia of why carbon is going to stay where it is than hearing it from a regulator that we say, well, it has to because that's the rules, or industry saying we have to because we want a permit. So it really helps to build that team as you're going out there and creating that, because we have great resources in this room with Colorado School of Mines and the School of Energy Resources that will help with that. So it's just important. In Wyoming, we have a very thorough outreach program, that the operator has to submit public notice for 4 consecutive weeks just to notify everyone within 1 mile of the project boundary that they submitted an application, and then putting our contact information. And we immediately go to work. The company is going out there talking to the community regarding pore space leasing. But at the agency level, we're talking to county commissioners, we're talking to environmental interest groups. We're picking up the phone and making those first calls, that most people would be scared of or are not interested, but you're going to have to talk to them at some point. So you might as well just rip the Band-Aid off and do it right there and then. And, having that team is really important, especially once you get to the public comment period. We got to Frontier's permit applications, and most of the people that attended the hearing were industry, kind of seeing what was going to happen with the permit applications and seeing what a hearing looked like. We had 1 citizen show up, and that was it. Most of our comments were from industry. And it really had nothing to do with our permit. It was more mineral and everything. So that really goes to show the amount of outreach that Frontier did going into that area. And I think we've noticed that nationally when there is a lack of stakeholder engagement or not engaging with the community, what happens to those projects.
And if I could build on that real briefly for a moment, it's become an unfortunate reality that opposing CCS is a good way to make yourself an influencer. And so, for example, we had a town hall for our project in Northeast Colorado where we had opposition come in from Omaha, and it actually backfired against the guy that was basically trying to stir up trouble at our town hall. Because we had done this deep, long, often engagement with the community, they recognized that this guy had no standing, and he was keeping us from having the conversation that the community actually wanted to have with us. So it was rather interesting that we had kind of outsourced opposition brought in, and it kind of backfired against them.
Yeah, I'll just go, I'll leverage what they said, that ditto to everything, definitely. But I will say it's been a grassroots effort. We started this project, and when we started it, there were not, I don't think anyone knew of a pore space agreement. So there was a huge educational component that we had. It was an uphill battle, not a battle, but we knew that there was a huge educational component to it. And we also knew that we respected our landowners and our stakeholders and our county commissioners a lot more than we didn't want to submit an application and leave them in the dark and then receive a notice, 30 days later, like, what is going on in my backyard? So it was really important for us to get boots on the ground and talk to these landowners and explain to them, we're not. First of all, you say climate change, and that's a 4-letter word where we're at. You do not say climate change. But what's important for us was to tell them, hey, we're here to keep industry going. That's what we want. We want to extend, the mines in the area. Coal is going away, but Trona, that's still there. We want to keep that going forever and ever for these sleepy communities. These communities are only there because they're employed by the mines. And so when you educate them and tell them that really hits home, like, okay, you're doing something for us. We agree. We like this. And then also be transparent as much as possible. I know that's difficult from an operating perspective, but that's huge. They want to know, and they want to have involvement too. So like Lily said, my daughter is now engaged to one of my landowner's grandson. She's not too happy about that, but it was a lot of milkshakes and it was a lot of coffee. And now they call me up just to shoot the breeze, like, hey, what's going on, Alicia? So I think that's huge, where the important thing is to get them rowing in the same direction, and just education, and make sure that these guys are smart. You know, they need to know what's going on. They're not dummies. And so just treat them with the respect that you would want. And I think that was huge, and that helped us in our public, you know, all this public outreach with our public comment period. I think it was, I was kind of sad not that many people showed up, but also thankful at the same time. So I think that was huge.
And you know, Alicia and Frontier are doing what I think a lot of us really need to be doing. You know, people get very excited about industrial hubs, right? When we talk about hubs, what does that mean? Economies of scale for the benefit of industry, and safety in numbers for the benefit of industry. What we need to be talking about are community decarbonization solutions and decarbonizing the economic engines of our communities, right? It's not about climate change always, and it's, you know, not about the CCS. It's about enabling these communities to have a competitive advantage even in a carbon-constrained future. And I think that's kind of the fundamental driving force behind the philosophy of many of us developers.
So isn't it great to see how everything we've been talking about is kind of coming together? This is an across-the-board collaborative effort from industry, from regulators, from landowners, from all of these stakeholders. And I would ask you to join me in really thanking these women for pioneering in this industry, and then we'll go to questions.
David Allenbaugh, Lawrence Berkeley Lab. I'm a geophysicist that leads the carbon storage program at LBL. And so I work a lot in the imaging side of things for subsurface monitoring. Ashleigh, I really appreciated your comments about the tax credit versus it's something we looked at in terms of the future of the applied geophysics community in this space. But the question I want to ask, and this might even include Kevin a little bit, is one of the things that DOE is just recognizing in the last couple years is the effect of individual projects that are getting permitted, you know, one-off permits on the basin scale subsurface conditions, and specifically the pressure regime. This is what caused the induced seismicity problems in Oklahoma that continue to this day, where you have too many injectors pressurizing a reservoir. That can cause multiple things. It can cause induced seismicity. It can cause, if you overpressure, suddenly develop leakage paths for brine up into the groundwater. And another thing is it might distort the pressure, the CO2 plume, so that you're not filling the pore space that you thought you were, and so suddenly your pore space rights break down. So I'm just wondering, from both a company point of view, how are you addressing basin scale effects, and then also from the regulators that have primacy, are you looking at this? Because like I said, the EPA isn't considering this yet, and the DOE is just starting to get on top of this.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to take a first start at that one. That is absolutely a concern that as a broader industry we definitely need to be thinking about, and I share your concern that many people have not been thinking about this for far too long. And I think, you know, from our perspective, we really prioritize projects that are highly feasible and where we don't have those kinds of risks. We've also taken the approach of, you know, we're staying away from the very, very busy regions, and we're doing smaller, more bite-sized projects where we're not likely to run into some of these issues, you know, until much, much later phases, you know, if things really expand in the basin. But I would point to, you know, it's definitely a concern I share for some of the projects, especially in the Gulf Coast. You know, there's a lot of CCS developers going and planning a lot of developments in the Gulf Coast. And I would reference some excellent work by JP Nico at the Gulf Coast Carbon Center, looking at how much CO2 you can start putting into some of those formations before you start materially affecting kind of the boundaries of fresh water on land and the USDWs on land.
And then as a regulator perspective, it is something we're definitely looking at. We're fortunate in Wyoming, you know, our basement rock is extremely deep. So, we're not going to have the same issues, like they would in the Midwest. So, that's certainly a benefit. But, looking at baseline, if someone feels it, it's going to be a concern. And, as the other conferences that I've attended, a lot of these permits, it's taking time to get them out the door because we've got one shot to do this right. And so it's also exciting for a regulator, that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to work in for CCS, and get to do the research and the scientific reviews and developing, policies for their state when it comes to the permitting rather than just strictly being nose deep into rules. So, we are looking at those, working with various groups on seismicity because, it could shut down a project. It could shut down the industry if we're not careful. So it is something that as regulators, on the state level that we are looking at, we need to learn what that looks like. But again, because Wyoming's been doing, class 1 injection since 1983, we're pretty well versed, and we've had some operators, even for the class 1 realm, when they look to inject pretty close to basement, we have measures in place to bring those, above basement, monitoring that occurs. So we've implemented that in our class 1 program already. So it's very easy that we'll transfer that to class 6.
I probably don't need to add to it. I mean, they did a great job of answering it, but Class 6 is extremely robust, comprehensive. There's a ton of testing that goes into this, and perhaps it's kind of a side effect of, if you remember, saltwater disposal and all that happened there. Those weren't monitored nearly as closely as Class 6 is. So not only that, but think of it as a two-step process. You drill, you get your permit to construct, and you drill your wells, or you drill them before you have these strat test wells, and you test it, and you test it, and you do core. I can tell you a lot of oil and gas operations do not go in and test core, test geomechanics, or have the seismic that goes into this. So you have to do a lot of analysis and really have your ducks in a row before you can even get to the point of injection. And then once you get to injection, it doesn't stop. You're on the hook to continuously monitor and monitor and monitor and drill monitor wells. And these monitor wells are not expensive one bit. And then come back in and do more seismic analysis. So there's a lot of things. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but there sure is a ton that really sets a project up to make sure they can mitigate it as much as possible.
The question is, you have multiple projects.
Yeah, okay, sorry. So for us, you do a lot, sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder, but you do a lot of work for CO2 plume. You model it, and your model is only as good as your data. We also do regional analysis. So I want to have an idea of what's going on within the region of the basin. So we have a good idea of what's going on there, and then kind of hone in on our project specifically. And so not only are we concerned with the CO2 plume, but we also model what the pressure front's going to be, because we know that there could be other things going on in the area. And so our pressure front could be 8 miles away, which actually it is. And so we have to make sure that we monitor that as well. And there are no rules and guidelines over that. So that's going to be kind of like a dynamic process. I know we're keeping an eye on it as an operator. We're going to be aware of what's going on in the area. And likewise, operators will too. But I think that'll be kind of a dynamic process.
And it's definitely a broader concern in the industry, right? We're only as strong as our weakest link, and not everybody's going to be as thoughtful about where they're developing their projects. And there are also people that are going to be approaching this more from that kind of old school Wild West perspective, and hire some consultants to get them some permits, and how sufficiently are they thinking about all these things for long term.
And just going back to, class 1s, they do area-wide permits, for multiple wells. And even though we're not looking at area-wide permits, we're not looking at the permits or the wells in a vacuum, and then it's like, what's just happening with this well? I mean, there's competing pressure fronts, making sure plumes, stay where they're going to be. And we are looking at these projects in an area-wide situation, and it's a stepwise process where at first it might just be the permit to construct and what's going to happen for this particular well, but we do have to look at all of it together.
Maybe if we could just have one final question. Thank you.
It's me, Matt more of a request than a question. But fantastic panel. And actually, I think these last 2 days have been really fantastic. I like many of the people in this room, probably go to way too many conferences and are traveling way too much. And a lot of times you just hear something, tune out. But this last 2 days have been fantastic. There's so much operational stuff. Stuff is hitting the ground and the decision makers are here. And my request to the association is, let's do this again. This was really great.
Thank you. With that, we'll wrap. Thank you very much.
Panelists here. All right. I'm going to try and wrap this thing up nice and quick for us here. So first, I'd like to thank again and recognize all our speakers, both today and yesterday, for taking the time to come down here and share their expertise with us. So for all the speakers. Okay. To conclude today's workshop, I want to once again extend my thanks to Governor Polis for hosting us here in Denver this week. I'd also like to thank Governor Gordon for his continued commitment and leadership on this issue. Thank you to our initiative partners, Basin Electric Power Cooperative, Google Energy, Idaho National Lab, JP Morgan Chase, Net Power, Tri-State Generation and Transmission Association, and the Walton Family Foundation. This work would not be possible without your support and contributions. Looking ahead, mark your calendars for our final workshop, which will be in Portland, Oregon, March 11th and 12th, hosted by Governor Kotek. The registration for that is now open on WGA's website, so make sure you get online and register. In the coming weeks, WGA will also be hosting a virtual webinar series, which will explore additional topics related to decarbonization, including liabilities for carbon storage and workforce development. So stay tuned for dates and agendas for those. And to our attendees here and those tuning in on the live stream, thank you for your participation in the Decarbonizing the West initiative and for your continued support of Western governors. I hope you will remain engaged in this initiative, and I hope to see many of you in Portland.